Is JT Miller done in Vancouver? Is a trade all but inevitable? The latest information seems to suggest that, so where might he end up? We'll discuss the possibilities, plus we have the latest information on the rumors surrounding Johnny Gaudreau, as well as Claude Giroux as we enter the offseason with a couple of high-profile free agents, plus, of course, the Avalanche eliminated the Blues. We have some more playoff injury updates and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news and rumors to talk about today. First up, I just want to quickly recap what happened last night in the 2022 Stanley Cup playoffs. We saw the Avalanche advance to the Western Conference Final. They will do battle with the Edmonton Oilers after defeating the St. Louis Blues 3-2 last night, taking this series 4-2. The Blues, of course, were trying to force a Game 7, and it did not happen. The Blues did really, for the most part, played a really good game, and a lot of the way they either led or was tying. It was really setting up to be, a potential Blues victory. The Blues scored, the Avalanche responded. Blues scored, Avalanche responded. Going late into the third, it was starting to look like it was heading for overtime, and then Darren Helm, the player we all would have predicted, right? The bottom six grinder, who's doesn't get a huge role with the Avalanche, but is there as a veteran to provide some leadership, comes through on a somewhat of a broken play, just rips a slap shot on net with just over 5 seconds left, and boom, it goes in past Husso. The Avalanche win the series. It's just as simple as that. It's one of those plays that you just can't predict. The Avalanche had the puck down to their end. I think it was around 12, 13 seconds left. Makar tried to get it up so they could try to get one more shot before the buzzer. And they did that. I think it was O'Connor, I believe it was, on the right side. Passed it over to Helm, but of course it wasn't really a great pass because he had pressure on him. Went off the boards. Boom, he just went in, bombed, took a slap shot, and went into net. Just kind of a crazy play. Last-ditch effort to get the puck on net before the buzzer goes. And the Avalanche pull it out and get the victory here. So we will have McDavid versus McKinnon, or McDavid and Draisaitl against McKinnon and Makar. It's going to be a very exciting Western Conference Final. A couple of the greats lining up against each other. I know the odds makers have the Avalanche being the favorites here, which is not really a big surprise, but based on how things have gone, I probably would say the Avs have a slight edge, but you just never know when you get to this point in the playoffs. Of course, tonight we have the big game between the Hurricanes and the Rangers. The game will be just getting underway as I start to record this video. So we're having Game 6, of course, in MSG. The Canes have yet to win on the road. So, the odds and the history will say that it's probably going to be a Rangers win tonight, and we'll have Game 7. But can the Carolina Hurricanes break that trend and wrap things up? We'll know here in a few hours' time, and we'll discuss that on tomorrow's video, recap on what happened there. Now, a few other updates we got on some injuries coming out of the Stanley Cup playoffs, which, of course, we tend to only learn after teams are eliminated. Of course, the Flames have been out now for just a short time. We did obviously learn that Chris Tanev is going to be needing a pretty significant surgery. Had major shoulder issues as well as a sprained neck, so he's going to probably be out for several months, I would think. But we did get confirmation from the Flames that there are a bunch of other players that have been dealing with injuries and are banged up, but he's the only one expected to require to have surgery. Sean Monahan would fall into that category, but since they opted to not let him finish the season, he already had his surgery back in April, so he's already got a bit of a jump start on his recovery process, and he is expected to resume skating here probably in a few weeks' time. So certainly that's good news for them. Obviously, Monahan just wasn't fit and strong enough to be able to fight through that. He wasn't really up anywhere near his old level of play, so it made sense for him to end his season early and have the surgery. We also learned yesterday some pretty significant news out of Boston that Brad Marchand, which we didn't even know he was dealing with stuff, because like I said, things are pretty quiet. You don't know what's going on until things are over with. But Marchand is going to be out for about 6 months. I wouldn't be shocked if it's a little bit longer. The release from the Bruins says that he had hip arthroscopy and labral repairs on both hips. So that's pretty significant. Hip surgeries are difficult to recover from. It's a long road recovery. Even if he is back in 6 months, that puts him probably missing more than likely October and November for the 22-23 NHL season. Can you imagine with him being out, if Patrice Bergeron is not back, since that is a big UFA question mark heading into the offseason here for Boston. Could he retire? Will he leave? We don't really know the status of Bergeron. I mean, most people feel that he's likely going to either retire or re-sign in Boston. If he does re-sign, it's probably short term. But still, if he's not back and Marchand's out, that's, two of your top players on that perfection line with David Pastrnak. That's going to be a big, significant change. We already saw the Bruins be, I wouldn't say they were, much different from the last few years, but I think that's fair to say they were a little bit weaker this year up front. Not having David Krejci there is a big difference. The Nick Foligno signing's not really working out. That could be a big, impact on that team for sure. So we'll see how the Bruins respond, and I guess we'll have to wait and see what happens with Bergeron probably before they really make too many other plans here. Back to the Flames, because we do have some updates, as I mentioned, on Johnny Gaudreau and some other free agents, including Claude Giroux. The Flames had their locker cleanout day, if you will, had their end-of-season media availability. At this point, it's difficult to kind of put the odds at Johnny Gaudreau staying in Calgary or leaving to go elsewhere, but I tell you, he said all the right things, and he said a lot more in his press conference today than I think a lot of people might have expected, indicating that Calgary's all he's ever known. He's been there for 10 years. He loves the city. He said his wife loves the city, which is certainly something you've heard lots of rumors about over the last couple of years, that he was eventually going to up and go back to the Northeast in the United States where he's from, whether it be Jersey, Philly, or some team in that vicinity, because there's several, so he could play closer to home. But he didn't really give off that vibe today. But at the same time, it's always up to negotiations as well. Brad Treliving spoke as well and indicated they were going to do everything they can within their power to get him signed. So I would think that they're probably going to have to open their the vault here and get him paid handsomely, because he's just had a career season well over 100 points. I don't know what the contract's going to look like, but I would think that they're going to offer the max term 8 years and probably somewhere around $9 or more million. It wouldn't be shocking if it's closer to 10. It's kind of hard to say. I mean, what are other teams going to offer in free agency? It's kind of hard to say. You get some wacky contract offers GMs offer when players like that become available sometimes. But Gaudreau, like I said all the right things, really made it sound like he really does love the team, loves the city, loves everything about it. Calgary's all he's ever known, and how his family's embraced it too. But he also said that obviously the next, probably short term, didn't give an exact time frame, but said in the leading days ahead, he's going to have some conversations with his agent and his family, and they're ultimately going to decide what is best. And they might even determine that, they're either going to determine that they're going to keep negotiating and try to get a long-term deal done before free agency, or they're going to decide that, we're very much open to signing here. We'd love to see the offers, but we're going to market regardless to see what else is out there too before we make our decision. And that's not completely uncommon or unusual. I would not be completely shocked if they go that route. His agent, Louis Gross, is really known for pushing that. Louis Gross is also pretty much known for being one of the tougher agents to deal with when it comes to encouraging players to, even wait, holdouts, all those types of things before getting something done. So we'll see what happens. But, like I said before, a lot of people seem to peg it, the fact that Gaudreau was likely leaving. Based on some reports out of Calgary, you would think that too. Now, it's really hard to say. I won't be shocked if he goes to market to see what the offers are, but I also won't be shocked if he returns. On another front here, Matthew Tkachuk was asked about signing a long-term deal, because he is obviously an RFA this summer. And he said he was very much open to that. His response was absolutely open to it. So that's encouraging news for Flames fans. I don't really think, based on what we've heard through the media and NHL insiders, as well as what they've both said publicly, like I know that they're kind of connected together. Some fear if Gaudreau leaves, that Tkachuk will be hesitant to sign long-term. And it doesn't necessarily sound that way. So we will see what happens here in the days ahead. But I know Chris Johnson, one of the NHL insiders on TSN today, said that he didn't think it would be too long before we had a clearer picture on Gaudreau, and we may not get a contract signed or have a final firm decision, but at least we should know whether or not he's intending to kind of push negotiations right now, or if they're going to wait and really want to see what else is out there before they make a decision. Now, of course, as well, we did get some information today on another big name pending UFA, and that's Claude Giroux, currently of the Florida Panthers. I know Sam Carchidi, who writes for Philadelphia Hockey Now, is a longtime respected writer in the Philadelphia area. He has a feeling that Ottawa is actually the favorite to land Giroux. I mean, Giroux himself did say when he was prompted at the end of the Florida season, doing their end of season media availability, if he could see himself returning to Florida, he said absolutely. But he also said that, they have to see how things go. And there's obviously a business aspect to this. So as much as he might be open to it, and I would believe the fact that he is, I honestly would not say that even if Ottawa is something that he's interested in and they're interested in, I don't think that he's got his sights strictly on only going there. I would think he's open to multiple things, and I think returning to Florida or another contender very much might be in the mix here as well. I don't think it's a slam dunk, even though Carchidi seems to feel that the Sens are like the leading contenders. Obviously, he cited the fact that Florida has some really tough major cap issues. I mean, that's just the fact, and that's the nature of the business here. So as much as there might be mutual interest, how cheap is Giroux willing to sign? Like, I don't see him doing a super cheap deal like we see with some guys like Jason Spezza or Mark Giordano in Toronto. I don't think he's at that stage of his career just yet. So to me, I don't know if they're going to be able to afford him. I've heard some reporters suggest that Giroux just might be a luxury they can't afford this offseason. It's going to be tough. They have to do a major extension for Jonathan Huberdeau, and they have a lot of money tied up in a lot of other deals that kick in. You get the extension for Barkov and Verhaeghe. There was some talk from Elliot Friedman that they'd like to trade Bobrovsky, but that's going to be very, very, very difficult, to get that $10 million goalie contract off the books when he's got a no-move clause and enough term left on it. Almost impossible, as much as they like the idea of it, would consider it. Finding a partner to dance with on that is going to be extremely challenging, if not impossible. So, Giroux back to Florida is not something I would rule out, but it's going to be really, really hard for them to pull it off. He also mentions, of course, the fact that we know he's from the Ottawa area. That's what he calls home in the summertime. I believe there's been some reports, I think, that he might be building a new home there. Obviously, probably would live there full time till he either does play in Ottawa or he retires. But of course, it also mentions in the article about the fact that their great young core could really benefit from a solid veteran like Giroux, and I 100% agree with that. We know the Sens want to probably add a top six forward this summer. Personally, I do think that it does make sense now, but if they at the same time, if they can find somebody that's not going to break the bank, that's younger, that might be a good option for them as well. But at the same time, like I said before, with all teams, you do need some veterans, and you need some guys that have been through the grind to get the playoff experience. They're going to help the younger guys along. And they've had a hard time adding quality veteran players. A lot, not all, but a lot of their veteran guys they've added have not worked out. And he could be the one that changes that. So we'll see what happens and see if Carchidi's onto something here, but certainly seems to be a lot of traction in his opinion that the Sens do stand an excellent chance at signing Giroux as a UFA this offseason. Now, the big topic today, though, is JT Miller down in Vancouver. And we've talked about Miller a few times here recently. I want to cite my video back. I think it was about a week or so ago. We talked about a Sportsnet article from, I believe it was Luke Fox, or maybe it was an Athletic article. There's been a number of them suggesting the Canucks and the Leafs might make good trade partners, with Miller being the piece going to the Leafs, possibly for like a guy like William Nylander. There were some other pieces involved as well. We know that Elliot Friedman has referenced the Kawhi type trade, where they see the Leafs making a big move and trading out one of their core pieces, which could be William Nylander. That wouldn't be shocking. But but we have more information now from Friedman to suggest that the JT Miller trade is almost a done deal. And I'm not going to say it's 100% because I don't think anything's 100%. Things can always change. But on the Donnie and Daly show, which has been a big point of discussion for Miller, obviously, where they cover the Canucks and he's their top offensive player from this year with a lot of uncertainty around him. They're bound to talk about him a lot. They've recently interviewed Friedman, who they interview semi-regularly, and then they've also had Jim Rutherford, who we talked about before, just in the last couple of days too, on their program. And Friedman kind of adds to what we talked about with what Rutherford said. Like when Rutherford was on, I got the feeling that a JT Miller trade was way more likely and a Bo Horvat extension was way more likely. So probably keeping Bo, trading JT is what it sounded like. But according to Friedman, he mentions that he does not see an extension coming through for JT Miller being very likely, that the Canucks don't see his age fitting their core's window to win. So like I mentioned before, there seemed to be a lot of hesitancy with Rutherford and Allvin to sign Miller long-term because he's approaching 30 years old, whereas a lot of their other core are still in that early to mid-20 range. So that does kind of line up and kind of half make some sense here. That do you want, a 30-plus player on a long-term deal when the bulk of your players are going to be trying to win together and have that window open are, 5 years younger on average or more. So that certainly, does kind of make sense. Now, he also mentioned that the trade offers have already started coming in. There's already discussions going on behind the scenes, and he believes there's going to probably end up being a bidding war and that some of the offers just might be too good to pass up. So obviously JT Miller is one of the few players that ranked high in NHL scoring this past year, with 99 points, that is actually likely available on the trade market. That does not happen a lot. So teams are going to be lining up to try to acquire this guy. Not to mention that he brings that grit, determination, tough to play against, leadership, all those intangibles that you can't teach players. Obviously he's productive, but you get all those other things too, so the value is through the roof. Now, the Canucks could probably land quite a haul in return for this kind of player as well, so it might make sense to give them their cap space, to trade the player as much as he's really, really good and arguably their best player. He's old enough that it doesn't line up with the other guys. You get a bunch of future assets or younger players in the mix here to help align better with what your organization is trying to do. It does make sense, and as long as they get the right deal, which it's tough to do, I'll keep reminding you that it's usually when you're trading the best player, you're quite often not winning that deal, but if you go about things carefully, it is possible to do. He also mentioned, here's the big part to me that was like the most most important detail, is he says the Canucks are willing to retain up to 50% of Miller's salary. So that to me is extremely enticing. It's only going to jack up the trade price too. So Rutherford and Allvin know if they tell teams, we'll keep half his salary, they're not going to get as much cap flexibility from it, of course, because he's making $5.25 million. But that just means they're going to get an extra asset and they're going to get more out of this. Can you imagine a team having JT Miller next year for $2.6 million? That's ridiculously cheap. And now teams may or may not care if they get an extension for Miller, because that's the key part here. He's got one more year left. A team acquiring him may want to work out an extension, and they may not. I think every team that's going to inquire on this is going to be in a different predicament. Obviously, a team getting him with an extension is probably going to be able to be willing to pay more too. So that will be an X factor in all this. Now, of course, the teams that I've put on the thumbnail here as potential landing spots, I said the Leafs, the Lightning, the Avalanche, and the Islanders. That's just my opinion. That's not rumored by Friedman or anybody else. I just kind of quickly went through the NHL and said, where does it make sense that he would be needed? So you're obviously looking for teams that are going to be considered contenders next year and teams that can get, most likely be in the playoffs. Because really, why would you want to acquire JT Miller for 1 year at 50% salary retention if you don't think you can do that, right? Doesn't make sense to give up the assets if there's no long-term commitment. So obviously, now you look at these four teams, the one team that sticks out is not really expected to be a contender is the New York Islanders, but I do think that Lou Lamoriello sees his team differently than a lot of other people do. And we know that Lou is expected to want to add a top 6 scorer and a top 4 defenseman, ideally, left shot defenseman preferably. So in that case, Miller could be that top 6 forward. Could he be the guy to play with Matthew Barzal? It's possible. He adds a different element in that top 6 that, I guess he would be similar to an Anders Lee in a sense, but he's way more productive more recently. I can see Lou being interested in that. Now, the problem here, though, is I don't know that the Islanders have the assets like some teams would to make it really intriguing. So, they'd probably want to offer a guy like Kiefer Bellows, maybe a first-round pick. There'd have to be more than that in there, too, but that's just a starting point. Maybe an Anthony Beauvillier. So, Beauvillier, Bellows, a first. I'm not sure what else. But something along those lines would kind of be your opening discussions, right? So to me, it's not so much that it's the absolute best idea, but I can see Lou liking that idea. So that's why I thought it would be something that we should discuss as a possibility here. So we will see, but ideally I think it would make more sense for the Islanders to get a younger top 6 because the team's already aging enough. And Miller is still very productive, but if they're going to sign him to a long-term deal at 30 years old, that kind of goes, they get enough of that, right? So I don't know. Like, short term it's good, long term it's not. That's the way I see it. So I don't know. Now when it comes to the Avalanche, of course, we don't know yet if they're going to win the Stanley Cup this year because they're still in the mix. So maybe they do, and maybe they do things differently. But we know they're likely going to lose Nazem Kadri in free agency this year. He had a monster breakout career season, and he's a pending UFA. So Kadri is going to be a big ticket that they probably can't afford anymore. So getting Miller for a year at $2.6 million to play in the top six to replace him would be absolutely huge. We know Kadri plays with an edge, well, so does Miller. He could give you a lot of those same things. Might even be better in some aspects. So, to me, you don't get weaker at all by losing Kadri and adding Miller. So let's say that they do win the Cup. Even if they do, they want to try to win it again. That, to me, is a terrific addition. Maybe they offer up a first-round pick and a guy like Alex Newhook. Newhook's not really playing regularly in the playoffs. I still think they see him as being a part of their future, sure. But you know what? It may not be, a case where they might be willing to part with him to get this done, right? If they can win a second Stanley Cup. It's hard to say. I'm not saying that I don't have any reason to think they definitely would trade him. But if you look at the roster and things they could include, that might be a good starting point for Vancouver, to get a guy like Newhook. In a first, and obviously there'll probably be another asset in there too. When you look at the Lightning, of course, this kind of deal has Tampa written all over it. Now, my only issue here as well is I don't know what Tampa would offer because they've given up a lot of other prospects. Yes, they could throw in a first-round pick. They could throw in, I don't know what they would have to, maybe a guy like Cal Foote, for example, or a Ross Colton. I don't know if they really want to break up that third line, but because we don't even know if they're going to re-sign Nick Paul. I think they're going to try real hard, but still, Miller played in Tampa before. There's still lots of people in the organization that would be familiar and know him, and he's the kind of player that fits right into their system. My opinion, that screams Tampa trying to win a Stanley Cup yet again. They're still in the mix too. They could go 3 in a row right now. We don't know yet because they're still obviously not done here in the playoffs. But regardless if they win this year or not, you know that they have the pieces in place to try to win again next year. And I can see them maybe considering something like that. And of course, there's the Leafs, who I suggested, like I said, a week ago. Now, I don't know that it would necessarily involve William Nylander. It could. Vancouver, if they're going to retain half of Miller's salary to then take on Nylander's as well, that would be challenging for them. So I think there would have to be other pieces involved to take money off Vancouver's books. Or the Canucks would have to have a separate trade to free up enough space. I can honestly see them liking William Nylander. What's not to like? He's a great hockey player, and he fits more with their age. 26 years old compared to 29 going on 30. So he's younger enough, has some term, and he's a very productive, good offensive player. I could see there being a match, but like I said, it's going to be very challenging. I don't know if they could pull that off. They may have to go a different route here. Maybe the Leafs offer a first-round pick. Maybe they offer up Timothy Liljegren, Nick Robertson. I don't know, something to that effect. They do have enough young assets to entice Vancouver. And a player like Miller at $2.6 million is exactly what they need. And really, to be honest, they could trade a guy like Alex Kerfoot. Put Kerfoot in the deal, for example, who makes $3.5 million. So they could actually save money. Kerfoot and say a couple prospects and a first or whatever it's going to take, Kerfoot and some future assets packaged together for Miller, and they would save money and get better. So do you not think that would be a phenomenal deal that the Leafs would have to absolutely look at? I think Kyle Dubas would be all over that. He'd be stupid not to. And to me, he's a smart enough GM that I think they would be all over it. So, could we see it be bigger and include Nylander? If you think about it now, I know it'd be difficult on the Vancouver side, but if you did Miller for Nylander and you had some other pieces involved, if Vancouver could make a way to make it work cap-wise, then they could, let's think about the savings that the Leafs get. But in my opinion, they get a better player. Now, the only problem is he's older and he's also not signed as long. So, it gives you that extra needed element. But in my opinion, the Leafs are only worried about the next year or two anyway, because that's what they have for contracts. Nylander's contract would be coming close to an end. Matthews is going to need a new deal, and you want to win before those next batches of contracts need to be done. It's imperative in Toronto, and I'll say it all summer long until we get there, depending on until we know what they're going to do. Like, to me, like next year, like every year it's leading up to the last couple of years has been like super big for Toronto. But next year, in my opinion, is paramount, that they got to get over that hump or they're going to be at risk to maybe, have to break up this team more and be at risk to possibly lose more because they're going to have more of these contracts starting to expire, and it's going to be that much tougher to keep everybody in the mix. So, I don't know. To me, Miller to the Leafs makes a lot of sense. It can be done in a number of different ways. It does not have to include William Nylander, but it could, and Vancouver could obviously benefit from it as well. So, we will see. I know, like I said, we talked about this a week ago, but with all the new information that we've learned, it just kind of connecting the dots, it just seems to make even more sense. So let me know what you think in the comments down below. Is Miller done in Vancouver? Where does it makes the most sense that he ends up? What kind of return could the Canucks be looking at? I think they're going to get a great haul, and the team is going to get a cheap Miller contract for a year at least to have a shot at going for a Stanley Cup next year. So let me know your thoughts down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.